The FBI opened up Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the initial information. Is that true?
That's correct.
Dossier come from President Trump's political opponents?
It was funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC.
All these conspiracy theories and other propaganda amplified by right-wing hate machine.
Couldn't even indict Hunter Biden.
We didn't investigate Mr. Hunter Biden.
Do you see how silly this looks? Like you found the lawyer, you found the phones, but the actual dude who got ordered by Western intelligence to go start this thing you couldn't find?
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C.
Did the Mueller report support that there was strong evidence of collusion?
Not to my knowledge.
He's damaged goods. There's no good dealing with him because you will end up on the bottom of a pyre.
I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of.
As the committee knows, on May 13th, 2019, Attorney General Barr directed me to conduct a preliminary review into certain matters related to federal investigations concerning the 2016 presidential election campaigns. That review subsequently developed into several criminal investigations and gave rise to my subsequent appointment as special counsel in these matters. As we said in the report, our findings were sobering. I can tell you, having spent 40 years plus as a federal prosecutor, they were particularly sobering to me. A number of my colleagues who spent decades in the FBI themselves, they were sobering. For one, we found troubling violations of law and policy in the conduct of highly consequential investigations directed at members of a presidential campaign and ultimately a presidential administration. To me, it matters not whether it was a Republican campaign or a Democrat campaign. It was a presidential campaign. During our investigation, we charged a former FBI agent who pleaded guilty to the felony offense of altering and fabricating a portion of a document used to obtain a court order, a FISA order, of a surveillance of a United States citizen, which in our view is a significant problem. Several of the relevant FISA applications at issue in the Crossfire investigation omitted references to what was clearly relevant and highly exculpatory information that should have been disclosed to the FISA court. Multiple FBI personnel who signed or assisted in preparing renewal applications for that same FISA warrant acknowledged that they did not believe that the target, Mr. Page, was a threat to national security, much less a knowing agent of a foreign power, which is what the law requires. It appears from our investigation that the FBI leadership dismissed those concerns. As our report details, the FBI was too willing to accept and use politically funded and uncorroborated opposition research, such as the Steele dossier. The FBI relied on the dossier in FISA applications, knowing that it was likely material originating from a political campaign, a political opponent. It did so even after the President of the United States, the FBI and CIA directors and others received briefings about intelligence suggesting that there was a Clinton campaign plan underway to stir up a scandal tying Trump to Russia.
The FBI opened up Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the initial information. Is that true?
That's correct.
The FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing that information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Durham, the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing any of the essential witnesses. Is that true?
That's true.
And the FBI also opened up Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed to evaluate that evidence. Is that true?
That's true.
Mr. Durham, if the FBI had done these things, if they had done their homework, would it have found that its own Russian experts had no information about President Trump being involved with Russian leadership or Russian intelligence officials?
Yes.
So then, was there adequate predication for the FBI to open Crossfire Hurricane as a full investigation?
On July 31st, in my view, based on our investigation, there was not a legitimate basis to open as a full investigation.
Did you prove false in the 2016 campaign that Trump's campaign manager gave polling data to a spy for a Russian intelligence service?
We didn't investigate that.
Mr. Durham, did the Mueller report establish that we had an illegitimate president occupying the White House?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Swallow stated in 2018, in our investigation, we saw strong evidence of collusion. Did the Mueller report support that there was strong evidence of collusion?
Not to my knowledge.
Even here today, we had Mr. Schiff raise questions about your public statement during the investigation, saying this somehow violated a DOJ policy. However, Mr. Mueller himself made a public statement in January of 2019. This is an article from CNN, headline, Mueller's office disputes BuzzFeed report that Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress. So whatever policy there might exist in the DOJ with respect to public statements by special counsels, it would seem that you and Mr. Mueller would be on equal footing with respect to it. Is that correct?
It would seem so.
And let's take a step back for a minute. In the chaos created by all these conspiracy theories and other propaganda amplified by right-wing hate machine, the one we continue to hear, a very simple point is getting lost. Republicans will do anything, say anything, and spend any amount of money to hide the basic truth that their leader is a criminal, corrupt, narcissistic buffoon. That's why we're still talking about Carter Page. That's why anyone even knows who John Durham is. That's why Republicans are still carrying on Mr. Durham's work by launching frivolous investigations that end with them embarrassing themselves by propping up obvious lies. It has always been about gaslighting the country. So instead of holding these farcical hearings about farcical investigations, I urge my colleagues, my Republican colleagues, to get serious and start legislating on behalf of their constituents.
So Danchenko is the primary subsource. A few years before he does this work, he was investigated by the FBI for espionage. Is that right, Mr. Durham?
Correct.
And that case was halted because the FBI thought he left the country, right?
Correct.
Had he left the country?
No.
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C., and we're going to stop this. And then they go hire him, use the tax money of the people I get the privilege of representing to pay this guy who they obviously knew was a Russian spy. They hire him, who's the source of all the false information. Is that true?
They paid him, they hired him, and they paid him.
A couple $100,000, if I recall, right?
It's over $200,000.
Yeah, and then this guy is hanging out with Dolan, Charles Dolan, who's a buddy of the Clintons, who's also a source for the false dossier that was used to spy on an American citizen. He's hanging out with Dolan. In fact, don't they meet on a park bench somewhere in Arlington, Virginia on New Year's Day?
New Year's Day, middle of the day.
I mean, this is straight out of the movies, right? And the FBI says, but we're not going to talk to Charles Dolan. I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of.
Ms. Durham, your investigation cost more than $6.5 million, involved the work of dozens of FBI employees and federal prosecutors, some of whom resigned in protest, and took roughly 4 years to complete. Is that correct?
No.
It's not correct.
No, I mean, there were multiple parts of that.
Did it take 4 years to complete?
Correct.
Okay.
Dossier come from President Trump's political opponents?
It was funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. So in that degree, yes, that's how it was paid for. First, let me make it clear that it is as disappointing, perhaps more disappointing to me and my colleagues, that these people would not agree to be interviewed. Some of them had a lot to say publicly, but they refused to be interviewed by our folks.
To the extreme disappointment of some on this panel, your investigation failed to produce indictments against Hillary Clinton, correct?
That's correct.
Didn't indict Barack Obama.
That's correct.
Didn't indict Joe Biden.
That's correct.
Couldn't even indict Hunter Biden.
We didn't investigate Mr. Hunter Biden.
Mr. Durham, DOJ policy provides that you don't speak about a pending investigation, and yet you did, didn't you?
I'm not exactly sure what
when the Inspector General issued a report saying that the investigation was properly predicated, you spoke out in violation of Department of Justice policy to criticize the Inspector General's conclusions, didn't you?
I issued a public statement. I didn't do it anonymously. I didn't do it through third persons.
But nonetheless, you violated department policy by issuing a statement while your investigation was ongoing, didn't you?
I don't know that. If I did, then I did, but I was not aware that I was violating some policy. And
you also sought to get the Inspector General to changed his conclusion, did you not? When he was concluding that the investigation was properly predicated, did you privately seek to intervene to change that conclusion?
This is outside the scope of the report, but if you want to go there, we asked the Inspector General to take a look at the intelligence that's included in the classified appendix that you looked at, and said that that ought to affect portions of his report.
And you thought it was appropriate for you to intervene with an independent investigation by the Inspector General because he was reaching a conclusion you disagreed with. You thought that was appropriate.
That's not, the premise isn't right. The Inspector General circulated a draft memo to a number of agencies and persons. Our group was one of them. We were asked to review that draft and bring to his attention any concerns that we had or disagreements.
And when he refused to change his report, you violated
Mr. Chairman, I
policy.
insist on regular order.
Well, it's not even his time. It's Ms. Lofgren's time. So the gentleman yields back to Ms. Lofgren, who's not here, so the time has expired.
Let me give you some real-life views on that. I have had any number of FBI agents who I've worked with over the years, some of them are retired, some are still in place, who have come to me and apologized for the manner in which that investigation was undertaken. I take that seriously.
Mr. Durham, Carter Page is an American citizen who, Naval Academy grad, served our country. Why not just talk to him before you spy on him?
In this instance, I mean, I don't know if people looked at this in the report. There was a particular piece of information that had been given to Michael Isikoff and appeared in a Yahoo News article on September 23rd, in which Mr. Isikoff lays out what he's obviously been told, and it's clearly the information from Steele. But it also included a statement that a senior law enforcement official confirmed that Carter Page was on the radar screen. That matter was never referred for investigation as to who leaked that. This is an investigation that's supposed to be closely held, confidential, sensitive investigative, and that's never referred to, nobody ever looked at. Who's the senior law enforcement officer who gave the information to Michael Isikoff that Carter Page was on their radar screen? That's not number one.
Who do you think it was?
Mr. Chairman, the time is well expired. The witness could answer the question. You can't ask another one.
I appreciate the ranking member for pointing that fact out.
Okay, I'm not sure. Am I supposed to answer or not? Am I done?
I'll let you answer.
Oh, okay. So then, with respect to Carter Page, within 2 days of that article, wrote a letter to Director Comey saying, I didn't do the things that are suggested. I didn't meet with these people. I'm willing to sit down and talk to the FBI, tell me when and where, essentially.
He offered to be interviewed.
To date, has any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia ever been uncovered?
I mean, there is information, obviously, in the report that was prepared by Director Mueller and whatnot. But as to collusion or conspiracy, I'm not aware of any.
And let me stop you. When the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane, that's the issue at hand, it did not have any information that anyone in the Trump campaign had ever been in contact with Russian intelligence officials. Isn't that right?
As we wrote in the report, we talked to the director of the CIA, the deputy director of the CIA, the director of NSA, and people within the FBI. And there was no such information that they had in their holdings at the time they opened Crossfire Hurricane.
None of the individuals you prosecuted were ever charged with being part of a hoax or a fraud or a witch hunt or a politically motivated deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump. Isn't that correct?
I would not say that that's accurate.
You mean you did charge somebody with being a part of a hoax?
We charged Mr. Sussman with having knowingly provided false information to the FBI regarding Alpha Bank.
But he was acquitted, though, right?
Well, that wasn't your question.
Mr. Sussman was acquitted after you charged him, correct?
Grand jury found
he was found innocent by a unanimous jury of 12.
That's not true.
Well,
what's true is the grand jury found probable cause to indict Mr. Sussman.
A jury of his peers acquitted him, though, correct?
And a trial jury...
You're not going to disagree on that, are you, Mr. Durham?
I'm going to try to answer your question as it was asked.
If I tried to follow your report, Mr. Donald Trump Jr. would have called it a nothing burger. You got no convictions. You got nothing. It was all set up to hurt the Mueller report, which was correct and was redacted, to hurt the Bidens, and to help Trump, and you were a part of it. You have a good reputation. You had a good reputation. That's why the 2 Democrats supported you. But the longer you hold on to Mr. Barr and this report that Mr. Barr gave you as special counsel, your reputation will be damaged. As everybody's reputation who gets involved with Donald Trump is damaged, he's damaged goods. There's no good dealing with him because you will end up on the bottom of a pyre. I yield back the balance of my time.
Sure.
Can we presume the gentleman's undecided on how he feels about the former president?
Gentlemen, the witness can respond.
Yeah, my concern about my reputation is with the people who I respect and my family and my Lord. And I'm perfectly comfortable with my reputation with them, sir.
Well said. God bless you.
I agree with Mr. Biggs. You've given us testimony today that you're disappointed that the FBI didn't cooperate more, right? That was your testimony.
Said that.
Yeah, so we're disappointed too, but the difference is when regular folks do things that are wrong and unlawful, there's typically greater effort to try to get those people before a grand jury to utilize criminal process where appropriate, not for other purposes. And it's just like, oh, well, Bill Priestep, the guy who might have set this whole op in motion, he just didn't want to talk to you about certain things, and you were real accommodating to that. And then Mifsud, the person who juices Papadopoulos to create this predicate that you find improper. You guys, I mean, did you ever know who his lawyer was, Mifsud's lawyer?
I talked to his lawyer in Europe. I don't know if
so wait, you could find the guy's lawyer, but you couldn't find him?
We contacted somebody that we knew had represented him in a part of the effort to try to locate him.
And you got the lawyer. And then now you're sitting here in front of the judiciary saying you could find the guy's lawyer, but you couldn't effectuate the service of a subpoena because you couldn't find him?
Well,
do you know how silly that sounds?
As you may or may not know, we wouldn't have the authority to serve a subpoena overseas. The lawyer didn't know where Mifsud was. He was in communication with him, but he claimed not to know where he was. And we were trying to arrange an opportunity to talk to Mifsud.
Did you take possession of 2 BlackBerry phones from Mifsud in any way?
There were phones that were provided to us by
so you could find the phones
lawyer.
with the guy.
Correct?
Do you see how silly this looks? Like you found the lawyer, you found the phones, but the actual dude who got ordered by Western intelligence to go start this thing you couldn't find? It's kind of laughable. It seems like more than disappointment. It seems like you weren't really trying to expose the true core of the corruption. That you were trying to go at it another way.
Yeah. As we said in the report, and as I said in my opening remarks, we pursued the facts as best we could.
Well, how about this
tools
fact?
that we have?
Okay, how about this fact, Mr. Durham? The entire Mueller team does a hard reset on their Apple phone in synchronization to wipe away evidence. Did you investigate that?
I've read that.
Well, why did you investigate it? Who gave the order on the Mueller team to wipe the phones?
Yeah, that was not something that we were asked to look at, and we didn't.
No, that's not true, Mr. Durham. That is not true, because I'm holding the document that authorizes your activity, and it specifically says the investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. It's in Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the order that says that you're supposed to investigate these things. And so, like, whether it's the Mueller team, Mifsud, how about Azra Turk? Azra Turk, what's Azra Turk's real name? Do you know that?
I'm not going to be disclosing the names of FBI personnel that are otherwise unavailable.
But an FBI, so the FBI sends somebody to go honeypot George Papadopoulos. Who gave the order to do that?
I think that's beyond the scope of what's in the report.
It's literally the scope of what your charging order is. Who put it in motion? We get after it was put in motion, the FBI did a bunch of wrong and corrupt things. Totally understand. We're trying to deal with that. But when you are part of the cover-up, Mr. Durham, then it makes our job harder.
Yeah, well, if that's your thought, I mean, there's no way of dissuading you from that. I can tell you that it's offensive and that the people who worked on this investigation have spent their lives trying to protect the people in this country and pursue within the law what it is that we are authorized to do.
You tried 2 cases, lost both of them, and then the one guilty plea you got, Kleinsmith is back to practicing law in Washington, D.C. today.
Yeah, that's beyond my control.
Right, but the fact that you allowed that plea to occur, right, and then the punishment was insufficient, the fact that you didn't charge Andrew McCabe, You didn't convict the lying Democrats or the lying Russians. You didn't investigate Mifsud or the Mueller probe, even though, as we sit here today in black letter, that was your charge. Have you ever heard of the Washington Generals?
The Washington Generals, yes.
Yeah, and they're the team that basically gets paid to show up and lose, right?
Well, I'm sure that the players who exert blood, sweat, and tears don't view it that way, but you might.
I think they do. I think they do, because the job of the Washington Generals is to show up every night and to play the Harlem Globetrotters. And their job is to lose.
I'm sorry, of a different, I was thinking of a different thing.
Yeah, so their job is to lose. And I'm kind of wondering, and it just seems so facially obvious that it's not what's in your report that's telling, it's the omission. It's the lack of work you did. And for the people like the chairman who put trust in you, I think you let them down. I think you let the country down. And you are one of the barriers to the true accountability that we need.
Do I get to respond to that or comment on that? Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever investigated a crime.
I don't know that you have. You didn't investigate these, Mr. Durham.
Whether or
How about
not,
Andy McCabe? Did you charge him? Did you investigate him?
Gentlemen, time has expired. The witness can respond, and then we'll move on to our last.
I don't know, sir, whether or not you've ever had occasion to try to investigate crimes under the rules and regulations and under the Constitution that we're bound by. We can gather evidence in particularly lawful ways. Can't charge people because we might think
it's not
something.
Just that
we
you
can
didn't charge. You didn't investigate.
Gentlemen's
you didn't
time.
investigate the Mueller team wiping their phones, and you won't tell
time.
us who gave the orders because you're protecting those people.
Gentlemen's time has expired.